It's a very interesting question which has long vexed historians. Janet Courtney, who, to be fair, was an anti-suffrage campaigner before the war, described the achievement of the vote in 1918 as a double-edged weapon of limited usefulness. And historians traditionally tended to take that view and to see the interwar period as a rather disappointing, rather feeble afterword, if you like, to the very exciting and dramatic campaigns for female suffrage before and indeed during the war. And I think that, on the other hand, that tends to underplay the very real legislative achievements after 1918 that were passed through Westminster. You have, for instance, the Sex Disqualification Removal Act of 1919. You have the Mother and Child Welfare Act of 1918. You have legislation such as the Matrimonial Causes Act of 1923, which aims to equalise access to divorce. You have Infanticide Act 1922, Bastardy Act 1923, and all of these could be defined as issues which appeal to female voters or are women's issues, however you define those. And so clearly there is some legislative progress in terms of improving women's lives. And likewise, you can see a similar scenario in the United States. The 1921 Shepard-Towner Act is designed to improve infant mortality rates, and so it's providing federal funds and federal money to set up mother and child health centres across the country. Now, what's so interesting about a lot of this legislation is that it tends to conceive of women and women's interests in terms of women as mothers and women as wives, rather than necessarily women as workers or women as equals to men. And I think in that sense the legislation does reflect a rather wider interwar conservatism with a small c, a cultural conservatism. And you see that in the backlash, for instance, against women who retain jobs after 1918, once the troops come home and at a time of mass unemployment. And so in that sense, the legislation, I think, does fit in with broader interwar cultural trends. I also think we do need to be cautious about either setting a time frame when we can detect the impact of the vote upon women and women's lives, but also we need to be cautious about simply seeing women's involvement in formal or institutional politics as the only way in which women could express themselves as citizens after 1918. And what's so interesting about women's experience in politics after 1918 is that a lot of it's actually non-political, and so it's through organisations such as NUSEC, NUSEC, which is the successor to the NUWSS, or through the NWC, National Women's Councils, which are trying to encourage women to participate in public life and to be more responsible citizens, but doing this in fairly non-political or non-politically aligned ways. Women are also, there are mass volunteer and associational groups for women in the interwar period, in particular the Mothers' Union, which has over 500,000 female members, or Women's Institutes, which is founded in 1915 and often derided for kind of jam and Jerusalem, but actually is playing a very important and a very significant role in encouraging women to become responsible citizens and educating women in the demands and the responsibilities, but also the rights of citizenship after 1918. So where we look for women's political involvement in the aftermath of suffrage, we mustn't just look at Westminster, but we also need to look at a local level, a municipal level, but also we need to look at the ways in which women's groups and feminist organisations were involved in a whole array of voluntary and associational life and culture in interwar Britain.